Mercantilism is an economic relationship between two regions, such as a mother country and its colony. Mercantilism is important to understand because it explains not only a lot about the world in the time we're studying, the 1500s and 1600s, but it also explains a lot about the world as it progressed through the 1700s, 1800s, and into the 1900s. Many scholars would say that World War I and World War II were wars over natural resources caused by mercantilist policies. Indeed, many countries still enact mercantilist policies to this day. It is unfortunate that the economics that underlay a lot of wars and conflicts are so little understood by the general public. Before we take up the mercantilism chart, we need to cover a few basic ideas. The best way to approach mercantilism is by putting ourselves into the position of the people who advocated it in the 1500s and 1600s. Let's imagine that our class is a group of advisors to a king. Of course, being a king, he's concerned about getting more money into the treasury, as well as making sure his country is wealthy, which will allow him to bring in more tax revenues, of course. So he is going to ask us for a policy recommendation for creating a wealthy country. One option is simply to tell him to sponsor privateers to sail around the world, capturing ships laden with silver and other riches. Capturing one of those ships would bring in a huge haul, wouldn't it? Now, one problem with this is the ethical issue, that stealing things isn't right. But let's put morality aside for now, as people usually tend to do that when they see that they can gain from a situation. Just from a standpoint of self-interest, there are problems with urging our king to set out on a program of capturing ships from other nations. The problem lies in the fact that big prizes, like that captured by Sir Francis Drake, who captured unknown tons of silver, in addition to gold and other treasures from the Spanish, big prizes like that don't come around too often, and so you can't count on them to enrich an entire country year after year. Of course, the more successful a nation's privateering expeditions are, the more likely it is that a country would have to face a reprisal from the people that have been plundered. So we will not advise our king to send out privateering vessels. Instead, we will urge our king to embark on a policy of making things and then selling them to other parts of the world. We can now anticipate our king's next question. If we tell him that we should enrich his kingdom by selling things made in our nation to other areas, he might counter, what types of things should we make? There are two basic types of goods that could be made. Raw materials, on the one hand, and manufactured goods, sometimes called finished goods, on the other. Raw materials are things that are taken directly from the soil, such as crops or lumber, chopped from trees, or minerals extracted from mines. Manufactured goods would be the things that are worked or refined before being sold to consumers, such as swords and clothing. A nice example of each would be lumber as a raw material, and the ships made from that lumber would be finished or manufactured goods. Another example would be wool, fleeced from sheep as a raw material, but wool clothing as a manufactured good. Okay, so what types of goods are we to advise our king to have this country make? What types of goods would bring in the most revenue? Raw materials or manufactured goods? Obviously, we're going to want to tell our king to have this country make whatever is more likely to bring in a lot of money. So what is it? What types of goods do you think would, in general, bring in more money? Raw materials or manufactured goods? Take a few seconds and think about what types of goods would generate the most revenue. The answer is manufactured goods. As a general rule, manufactured goods bring in a lot more money than raw materials. Back in this time, it was noticed that the cost of iron nails and cannon cost much more than the iron that constituted these objects. In a similar fashion, wool clothing would cost a lot more than the price of the wool that went to make up the clothing. To give a more modern example, a box of cornflakes that typically goes for $3 in the grocery store has between 10 and 15 cents worth of corn in it. Another way to understand how much more money selling manufactured goods would give a country would be to imagine that the room you are in as a warehouse full of goods for sale. What would bring in more money? A room full of laptops, computer monitors, and big screen TVs? Or that same room full of loaves of bread or bags of rice? Now, in case you are thinking of crude oil as a raw material, and as an exception to the rule, sorry, but the crude oil is the exception that proves the rule. As of August 9th, 2013, a barrel of West Texas Intermediate, a benchmark oil, is going for $103.40. That sounds like a lot, and I'm not going to tell you that it's cheap, but the fact is that a barrel of oil has 42 gallons in it. In other words, today, crude oil is priced at $2.46 a gallon, a bit cheaper than you can get a gallon of milk for in a store. What drives home the fact that manufactured goods are more expensive is looking at the current price of gasoline, a product made from refining crude oil. According to the U.S. Federal Energy Information Administration, the average price of gasoline in this country on August 5th, 2013 was $3.62 a gallon, quite a bit more than the crude oil that it came from. Okay, so we are going to advise our king to have our country make and then sell manufactured goods. In the same way, kings and parliaments pursue policies designed to enable them to make and sell as many manufactured goods as possible. Now it's time to look at our mercantilism chart. I'll start by reading the definition first, and then we'll look at the graphic part. The definition here: mercantilism, a system where one country acquires a lot of gold by exporting more expensive manufactured goods while importing cheaper raw materials from other areas. Three main policies were utilized in the mercantilist system. 1. The use of colonies to supply raw materials to and purchase manufactured goods from the mother country. 2. Tariffs on manufactured goods from other countries. And sometimes 3. Subsidies for exports to other regions. Now let's look at the pictures. There are 3 basic sections here. The top right is England. This chart portrays mercantilism from the standpoint of England. You see the treasure chest right by England as accumulating gold by selling expensive manufactured goods as the goal of our policies. Now, this is not to say that England was the only mercantilist country. Any country that had the ability to implemented mercantilist policies: the Dutch, the French, Portuguese, and Spanish. As was explained earlier, the English are going to go about selling manufactured goods. First of all, English businesses will sell them to English consumers. This can be done until French producers start shipping their goods to England and competing with English goods on the store shelves. But if English consumers buy French imports because they're of higher quality or cheaper price, or both, the English factory owners won't be able to pay taxes to the English government. And so the English government will impose tariffs, that is, taxes on imports, on French goods brought in to England. Now, tariffs serve 2 functions. 1, they can raise the price of the imported goods so much that the consumer decides to buy a domestically produced good made in England instead. Or, even if the English consumer decides to buy the French product anyways, that tariff will still take money and send it to the English government. And so the government will make its money regardless of what products the English consumer chooses to buy. Now look at the chart towards the bottom right corner. Do you see the arrow going from France towards England? The thick black line on top of the arrow represents tariffs designed to keep French products from going to England. Now, this mercantilist project doesn't stop there. In addition to selling in England, English factory owners also would like to sell elsewhere. But unfortunately, because the English have raised tariffs against French products to limit the number of French goods sold in England, the French have levied retaliatory tariffs against English products. And so English products aren't likely to be sold in France. So where else can English products be sold? In English colonies. And so one function of colonies is to provide a market for manufactured goods from the home country, the mother country. Do you see on the chart an arrow that goes from England to the American colonies? There is a factory with a smokestack right next to it. That arrow represents manufactured goods made in England, shipped to America, and sold to the colonists there. Of course, they really didn't have factories with smokestacks back then. Their factories would have been what we would call workshops. And in order to keep the French products from competing with English products on American stores, tariffs are levied. That is shown in the black line next to the arrow, the left of the arrow that is pointing from France towards America. As more and more English are working in workshops, taking wool and turning it into clothing, or taking lumber and turning it into ships, there is a greater demand for the raw materials that are being turned into manufactured goods. Remember the colonies that consume the manufactured goods from England, the mother country? They are going to pay for those manufactured goods by selling raw materials to England. And so England's workshops will receive whatever raw materials that England itself can't provide from its colonies, in this chart, America. Up to this point, mercantilism sounds very intuitive, like a good thing for a country. These mercantilist policies will help protect English factory owners from foreign competition, and the colonies will consume all the manufactured goods that the English themselves can't or don't buy. And these same colonies also provide raw materials for English factories. It sounds simple, but rarely in life are things so simple. First of all, let's go back to those tariffs. Levying tariffs on other nations could be seen as a form of economic warfare, because it is taking money from the pockets of the businessmen of another country. Literally not taking money from their pockets, but keeping it from going there to begin with. As you can understand, rising tariffs would increase the tension between two countries. And if you look at the historical record of the 1600s and 1700s, you will find that within a few years after one country raises tariffs against another country, that war between those two countries would break out. What makes this mercantilist policy even more ridiculous is that often, part of the peace settlement at the conclusion of the wars would be a return to the lower tariffs before the war broke out. Why raise tariffs, supposedly in order to benefit your country, if doing so will only get you involved in a war with people who would otherwise be consumers of your products, only to find out at the end of the war that you have to lower your tariffs anyways? Why not keep your tariffs low to begin with and avoid paying for an expensive war? That's a very good question. Another problem is how these mercantilist countries went about acquiring their colonies. Very often they would be acquired through wars against the peoples all over the world who were already there. There was another problem with this mercantilist drive for colonies. It tended to snowball in the sense that if one country was acquiring colonies, it would prompt other countries to do the same. How? Let's go back to our example of England acquiring colonies to provide England with raw materials and to buy English manufactured goods. If France just sat back and did nothing, while England was getting its colonies, think about what that would mean for French businesses. England would be acquiring colonies all over the world, that would be sending raw materials not to France but to England. And so if French businesses wanted to buy raw materials, they would have to pay top dollar for them from English merchants, if they could get them at all. Expensive raw materials would make French manufactured goods more expensive, and when French businesses wanted to compete against English finished goods, the French would be at a distinct disadvantage and would have to raise the prices of their goods in order to pay for those more expensive raw materials. In order to survive then, the French would be forced to send out colonies even if they hadn't originally planned on doing this. Going back to war for a second, not only would mercantilism drive countries to go to war against native peoples, but it would drive those mother countries to go to war against each other, as each country was trying to enlarge its colonial territory or defend its current colonies against encroachment by other colonial powers. The French and Indian War, referred to in European history as the 7 Years' War, was obviously one of those wars. It started with fighting between French and British forces in the Americas, both trying to keep the other out of the Ohio River region. So let's take a step back and review the component parts of mercantilism as well as its problems. First of all, mercantilism involves a policy designed to promote the sales of manufactured goods by the businessmen of a country. In order to do this, that country will raise tariffs against manufactured goods of other countries. In order to increase sales of those manufactured goods and to secure raw materials used in the making of those finished goods, countries will acquire colonies. There are several problems with mercantilism. These policies would increase tensions between countries, which occasionally would boil over into active warfare. Also, the policy of securing colonies often involved war against the native peoples, and in order to defend or enlarge one's colonial empire, wars were often undertaken against other colonial powers seeking the same colonial territory and the same raw materials. Next week, when we look at the Enlightenment, we will examine the writings of Adam Smith and David Hume, who criticized mercantilism and offered a very good alternative. Now, you can look at the Navigation Acts chart, which shows various laws that the government of England enacted in order to impose mercantilist policies on the American colonies.